He kicked his wife out to take the house, but she handed him the $10 million blackmail demand instead. The courtroom visual, a sleek courtroom, marble floors. The air conditioning hums too loud. A man in an expensive suit sits at the defendant's table, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming a quiet, nervous rhythm against the polished wood. His name is Marcus Whitfield. 6 months ago, he told his wife she was dead weight. He told her she contributed nothing. He told her with a smile that barely concealed his contempt that she should be grateful he was letting her leave with her clothes. He is not smiling now. His attorney leans in, whispers something. Marcus goes pale, not the pale of surprise, but the pale of a man who has just realized that the ground beneath him was never ground at all. It was glass, and it has been cracking for years. The judge adjusts her glasses, reviews the document in front of her, and says 6 words that will haunt Marcus Whitfield for the rest of his life. Judge. The settlement stands, all of it cut to black. A kitchen, 3 years, a warm kitchen. Morning light filters through linen curtains. A woman, Eleanor Whitfield, 41, composed, careful, quietly brilliant, stands at the counter. She is not making breakfast. She is holding a bank statement. Her coffee has gone cold. She reads the statement a second time, then a third. Her expression does not change. She folds the paper precisely, places it back in the drawer beneath the utility bills, a drawer Marcus has never once opened. She picks up her coffee, pours it down the drain, and makes a fresh cup. She does not cry. She does not call anyone. She simply opens her notebook, the one with the green cover that looks like a grocery planner, and writes one line. The camera holds on the page just long enough for the viewer to read it. It says, Account 4471. Second transfer, $14,500. Recipient, D. Calloway. Beneath it, already written from weeks before, are 11 other entries exactly like it. She closes the notebook, finishes her coffee, and begins to make breakfast for their daughter, Sophie, as though nothing in the world has changed. A parking garage, 2 years visual, underground, concrete pillars. Fluorescent lights that flicker. Eleanor sits in her car, engine off, watching a man she does not recognize hand a manila envelope to her husband. Marcus takes it without looking at the man. He opens it briefly, fans through papers, nods once, and tucks it under his arm. The other man, heavyset, mirrored sunglasses despite the darkness, says something. Marcus laughs. Eleanor films the exchange on her phone. Her hand is steady. She does not know yet what is in the envelope. She does not know yet the name of the man in the sunglasses, but she has learned in 3 years of careful, quiet observation that every secret her husband carries eventually has a price tag. And that price tag, she has decided, will one day belong to him alone. She drives home. She tucks the phone in her bag. She picks Sophie up from school and takes her for ice cream. She is 5 steps ahead. She has been 5 steps ahead for a very long time. Before we begin, if you are watching this right now and you have ever been underestimated by a partner, a colleague, a room full of people who looked right through you, this story is for you. Eleanor Whitfield did not raise her voice once. She did not beg. She did not break down in a parking lot or send a furious text at 2 a.m. She did something far more powerful than any of that. She waited. She watched. And when the moment came, she handed him everything he thought he wanted. We are about to walk through 5 chapters of one of the most meticulously executed personal strategies you will ever hear. And trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. But before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories about intelligence over impulse, strategy over spectacle, justice served cold, the way it hits hardest. Like this video if you believe that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the most dangerous. And share it because someone in your life needs to hear Eleanor's story today. Send it to them, right now. Before you forget, all right, let's go back to the beginning. Chapter 1. The discovery. Eleanor Whitfield had a gift that most people mistook for a personality flaw. She noticed everything. Not in the anxious, exhausting way of someone who is always waiting for disaster, but in the quiet, architectural way of someone who understands that systems have logic, and when the logic breaks, something is wrong. She noticed the half-degree tilt of a picture frame. She noticed when the grocery receipt didn't match the items in the bags. She noticed at the age of 9 that her father always left the room when certain phone calls came in, and she had cataloged that detail without judgment and without urgency, simply filing it away because she understood, even then, that facts had a way of becoming useful. She had married Marcus Whitfield at 32. He was charming in the way that men who have always been given things are charming effortlessly, thoughtlessly, as though the world was simply obligated to find him appealing. He was handsome and loud and good at parties, and Eleanor, who was none of those things, had believed for a while that they balanced each other. He brought the electricity, she provided the structure. He was the visible architecture of their life together. She was the foundation. The problem with being a foundation, Eleanor would later understand, is that no one notices you. Not until the building starts to crack. Their daughter, Sophie, was 7 when Eleanor first found the discrepancy. It was not dramatic. It was a single-line item on a bank statement, a transfer of $14,500 to an account she didn't recognize, listed under a name she had never heard. D. Calloway. Marcus handled the business accounts. Eleanor handled the household finances, the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the investment portfolio she had quietly grown from the modest inheritance her mother had left her. She was meticulous. She had spreadsheets that stretched back 8 years. She knew to the dollar what their financial picture looked like on any given morning. This transfer did not fit the picture. She didn't confront Marcus. Not because she was afraid of him. Eleanor Whitfield was not afraid of very much, but because she had learned, in 9 years of marriage, that confrontation without evidence was just noise. Marcus was a skilled deflector. He was the kind of man who could make you doubt your own memory while standing in front of a mirror. If she walked into the kitchen and said, "What is this transfer to D. Calloway?" he would have an answer. He always had an answer, and the answer would be smooth and reasonable and just believable enough to make her feel guilty for asking. So she didn't ask. She opened the green notebook instead. It began as a single entry. Within 6 weeks, it was 4 entries. Within 4 months, it was a pattern so consistent that Eleanor could predict the transfers almost to the week. Always between the 9th and the 14th of the month, always to the same account, always between $8,000 and $16,000. Over 14 months, she calculated the total. Just over $190,000. She cross-referenced the transfers with their business accounts. Marcus owned a mid-sized commercial real estate firm, Whitfield Property Group, which Eleanor had helped capitalize in its early years using $340,000 of her own savings. A fact that appeared nowhere on any official company document, because Marcus had assured her that marriage is its own contract. She now noted, for the first time, the legal implications of that assurance. In month 15 of her documentation, Eleanor found the second thread. She had been reviewing their personal credit accounts, a quarterly habit she maintained as casually as most people check the weather, when she found a secondary credit card she had not known existed. It was in Marcus's name only. The billing address was a post office box she didn't recognize in a neighborhood across the city. In 18 months, the card had accumulated $67,000 in charges, restaurant bills, hotel stays, furniture purchases, a children's clothing store, 3 separate transactions, each in the range of $400 to $600. Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at the children's clothing charges for a long time. She was not a woman given to dramatic internal monologue. She did not spiral. She simply acknowledged what the evidence was beginning to suggest, and she adjusted her strategy accordingly. She hired a private investigator. Not a dramatic, Hollywood-style operative, a quiet, methodical woman named Grace Chen, who worked out of a modest office above a dry cleaning shop, and who came highly recommended by Eleanor's attorney. A woman named Patricia Holt, whom Eleanor had quietly retained 3 months earlier for estate planning purposes. Grace Chen's report arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside a manila envelope that Eleanor opened at the kitchen table while Sophie was at school and Marcus was at the office performing whatever version of himself he performed there. The report confirmed what the transfers had suggested. Marcus Whitfield had a second life. Her name was Diana Calloway. She was 34. She worked in marketing. She lived in a two-bedroom apartment that Marcus had been paying for since before Sophie's 5th birthday, an apartment that Eleanor had unwittingly helped subsidize through the household accounts she managed with such careful, loving precision. Diana Calloway had a son. He was 3 years old. His name, according to his school enrollment documents which Grace had legally obtained, was Marcus Jr. Eleanor read the report twice. Then she placed it in the green notebook, tucked behind the financial records. She looked out the kitchen window for a while. Then she picked up her pen, opened to a fresh page, and wrote 2 words at the top: asset inventory. She had work to do. Chapter 2. The strategy. Eleanor Whitfield spent the next 11 months doing something that most people in her position would never have thought to do. She learned everything. Not just the facts of Marcus's betrayal, those she already had, documented with the precision of an auditor and the patience of someone who has accepted that the truth does not need to hurry. She learned the asterisk structure of everything they had built together. She took a course in real estate law, attending evening classes twice a week while Marcus assumed she was at her book club. She consulted, through Patricia Holt, 3 separate financial analysts. She had their property portfolio independently assessed. She reviewed the corporate documentation of Whitfield Property Group with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant because she had, quietly, become one. What she found over those 11 months was extraordinary. Marcus Whitfield was not simply an unfaithful husband. He was a deeply, structurally compromised one. The real estate business, the business Eleanor had helped launch with $340,000 of her own capital, was carrying $2.3 million in undisclosed liabilities. Several of these liabilities were tied directly to the second apartment, to Diana Calloway's lifestyle, and to a series of business decisions Marcus had made to conceal his personal spending from the company's official accounts. He had commingled personal and business expenses so thoroughly that any competent forensic accountant and Eleanor had now become one could trace a direct line from the company's debt to his private arrangements. There was more. Through Grace Chen's continued investigation, which Eleanor paid for in cash, from a personal savings account Marcus had no knowledge of, she identified the man from the parking garage. His name was Raymond Prout. He was a former business associate of Marcus's, a man with whom Marcus had conducted a transaction 5 years earlier that had not been entirely above board. The nature of that transaction was complex, but its essence was simple. Marcus had used Raymond's identity and a fabricated signature to front a property deal that should not have been approved. The deal had made Marcus $800,000. Raymond had received $30,000 and a promise of silence. The problem was that Raymond Prout was not, it turned out, a man of particularly durable patience. The manila envelope Eleanor had filmed Marcus receiving in the parking garage contained a demand. Raymond wanted more. The correspondence between them, which Eleanor obtained through channels that Patricia Holt had advised her on carefully, showed a 2-year history of escalating payments. Raymond had already extracted $480,000 from Marcus. And in his most recent letter, he had made clear that his appetite had grown considerably. He was now requesting $10 million in exchange for the original documentation of the fraudulent transaction, which Raymond had apparently had the foresight to retain. Eleanor read this demand with the focused interest of a scientist examining a particularly useful specimen. Marcus was not merely a cheating husband sitting on hidden assets. He was a man standing in the center of an enormous liability, financial, legal, and personal, that he had been desperately trying to conceal from everyone, including, apparently, the woman who had been managing his accounts with perfect competence for 9 years. She added Raymond Prout's name to the notebook. She added the $10 million demand. She added a note beside it in her small, careful handwriting: "Not my liability. Must become his, formally and legally, before settlement." Patricia Holt, when presented with the full scope of the documentation, was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Eleanor, you understand what this means for the settlement?" Eleanor said, "That's why I'm here. They spent the next 6 weeks building the architecture of what Patricia later described in her 30 years of family law as the most airtight piece of strategic marital documentation she had ever reviewed. Every debt cataloged, every liability mapped, every hidden account traced to its source. Every property assessed for its true encumbered value which, once the hidden liabilities were accounted for, was dramatically different from its apparent value. The house, for example the 5-bedroom colonial in Westfield Heights that Marcus had already begun telling his colleagues he intended to keep, had a mortgage Eleanor had been paying down for 6 years. It was also listed as collateral against one of the business's undisclosed liabilities. Its net real value, once properly encumbered, was roughly $340,000, which was, Eleanor noted with a composure that bordered on the poetic, almost exactly the amount she had originally invested in the business. The business itself, the crown jewel Marcus intended to walk away with, was carrying the weight of $2.3 million in hidden debt, $480,000 in blackmail payments already made, and the looming $10 million demand from Raymond Prout that had not yet been disclosed to any legal authority. Eleanor read the asset summary one final time. She closed the notebook. She went home, made dinner, helped Sophie with her homework, and kissed her daughter goodnight. She was ready. Chapter 3. The fake defeat. Marcus Whitfield asked for a divorce on a Thursday evening in October. He had clearly rehearsed it. He was dressed well, not in his work clothes, but in the casual blazer he wore when he wanted to seem relaxed and reasonable. He had poured himself a drink before she came downstairs. He stood near the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around a glass of whiskey, and Eleanor thought, with a detachment she found almost amusing, that he had positioned himself like a man in a film, like a man who expected applause. He told her the marriage was over. He told her they had grown apart. He said it was no one's fault, the sentence of a man who has decided that responsibility is optional. He told her he wanted to handle it respectfully, which Eleanor understood to mean he wanted to handle it quickly, before she had time to think clearly. He then outlined his terms. He would keep the house. He had, he explained, a deep personal connection to the property. He had built their life there, he said, without apparent awareness of the irony. He would retain full ownership and operational control of Whitfield Property Group. He was prepared to offer her a cash settlement of $250,000, a figure he presented with the magnanimous air of a man doing someone a very large favor, plus spousal support of $4,000 per month for 3 years. He would also, he said, need her to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the business's internal finances. Eleanor listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." Marcus blinked. "Okay, I'll agree to your terms." A pause. He had prepared for negotiation. He had prepared for tears, for accusations, for the kind of protracted emotional scene he could then describe to Diana Calloway as evidence of Eleanor's instability. He had not prepared for "okay, Yule." He cleared his throat. "You understand what you're agreeing to?" "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "I want out of this marriage cleanly. I don't want to fight over property. Take the house. Take the business. I just want to move forward." She saw it cross his face, the flicker of something that might have been suspicion, quickly swallowed by something much larger, ego. He had told himself for years that Eleanor was dependent on him, financially, emotionally, structurally. He had reduced her in his own mind to a function, the woman who managed the accounts and raised the daughter and kept the household running while he pursued the life he actually wanted. And here she was, confirming it. Confirming that without him, she had nothing to fight for. Confirming that she was, exactly as he had always believed, simply grateful to have been part of his life at all. He straightened slightly, set down his glass. "I think that's the right decision," he said, and his voice had shifted into the warm, patronizing register of a man who has decided to be gracious in victory. "I think you'll be better off, honestly. Fresh start." Eleanor smiled at him. It was a small smile, precise and controlled. "I think you're right," she said. "A fresh start for both of us." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of Sophie's bed and listened to her daughter breathe in the dark for a while. Then she texted Patricia Holt one word: ready. The legal process that followed was, on its surface, exactly what Marcus had described: amicable, efficient, and entirely in his favor. Eleanor's legal team, to the visible satisfaction of Marcus's attorney, a man named Garrett who specialized in rapid, favorable settlements, made no significant objections to the division of assets. They reviewed the paperwork. They asked a handful of what seemed like procedural clarifying questions. They made one small addition to the settlement language: 3 paragraphs, buried on page 14 of a 22-page document, that Garrett reviewed and dismissed as standard boilerplate regarding liability assumption. It was not standard boilerplate. Those 3 paragraphs specified, in language Patricia Holt had spent 6 weeks refining, that by accepting full ownership of Whitfield Property Group and the Westfield Heights property, Marcus Whitfield was formally accepting all associated liabilities, disclosed and undisclosed, legal and financial, present and pending, as of the date of settlement, all of them, including those not yet presented in court. Garrett did not catch it. He was moving too fast. Marcus, who had not read the full document because he had told himself that Eleanor would not dare try anything, did not catch it either. They both signed. Eleanor signed. The notary stamped the document. Marcus shook Garrett's hand outside the law office and told him to send the final invoice. He was in a good mood. He was already mentally redecorating. Eleanor walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. She checked her phone. There was a message from Sophie, a string of emojis, something about a science project. Eleanor smiled, a real smile this time, wide and unguarded, and typed back a response. Then she pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the next chapter of her life. Chapter 4. The courtroom climax. The settlement hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after both parties had signed the agreement. It was supposed to be a formality. Marcus had told Diana Calloway it would take less than an hour. He had already, according to the evidence Patricia Holt's team had gathered, told 3 separate colleagues that the divorce was handled and that Eleanor had taken the easy payout. He had said this with the cheerful contempt of a man who genuinely believes that fairness is something invented by people who cannot compete. He arrived at the courthouse in a gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He arrived with Garrett at his side, carrying a leather portfolio that contained, among other things, the signed settlement agreement that Garrett had reviewed perhaps 4 times in total, and Marcus had reviewed not at all. He arrived with the energy of a man who has won something, which, in one narrow, soon-to-be catastrophic sense, he had. Eleanor arrived with Patricia Holt and a second attorney from Patricia's firm, a younger woman named Simone who specialized in forensic financial litigation. Eleanor wore a navy blazer over a white shirt. She carried nothing. The first 20 minutes of the hearing proceeded exactly as expected. The judge, Honorable Margaret Calloway, a woman with the focused patience of someone who has heard every variation of human foolishness at least twice, reviewed the settlement documents, confirmed both parties had signed voluntarily, confirmed representation on both sides. Then she turned to a secondary document that Eleanor's team had filed with the court the previous afternoon. Counselor Holt, Judge Calloway said, "I'm reviewing the liability disclosure filed yesterday. Can you walk me through the material?" Garrett, beside Marcus, straightened slightly. "Your Honor, we weren't notified of any secondary filing. You were notified at 4:17 yesterday afternoon," Simone said pleasantly, sliding a copy of the email notification across the table. "Here is the confirmation." What followed in the next 45 minutes was, by every account of the people present, a masterclass in controlled demolition. Patricia Holt, calmly and methodically, walked the court through the financial documentation Eleanor had spent 11 months assembling. The $2.3 million in undisclosed business liabilities, the commingling of personal and business expenses, the hidden credit card, the second apartment, the $190,000 in transfers to Diana Calloway's account, all of which, per the settlement agreement Marcus had signed, were now his sole legal responsibility. His financial team had not known about most of these because Marcus had concealed them from his own accountants. Marcus was very still. Garrett began writing on his notepad in a rapid, increasingly agitated hand. Then Simone presented the second phase of the disclosure. The Raymond Prout documentation. She laid it out with the efficient clarity of someone who has organized information specifically to be understood by a person encountering it for the first time, which the judge was, and which Garrett was, though Marcus was most decidedly not. The original fraudulent transaction, 5 years prior, the escalating payments, the $480,000 already paid. The identity of Raymond Prout, now under investigation by the Financial Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office. A referral, Simone noted, that had been made by a private citizen providing documentation to law enforcement approximately 3 weeks ago. The $10 million demand, pending, legally unresolved. And by the terms of the settlement agreement, specifically the 3 paragraphs on page 14 regarding assumption of all associated liabilities, disclosed and undisclosed now formally, legally, and irrevocably the responsibility of Marcus Whitfield, sole owner of Whitfield Property Group and the Westfield Heights property. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Calloway reviewed the documents for what felt like a very long time. Then she removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis they found profoundly unsurprising. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "your counsel signed a settlement agreement that explicitly assumed all undisclosed liabilities. The language is unambiguous. Do you wish to contest the validity of that agreement?" Garrett leaned in close. There was a rapid, hushed exchange. Then Garrett straightened, adjusted his jacket, and said in the careful tone of a man choosing his words from a very reduced menu, "Your Honor, we would ask for a continuance to review the secondary filing." The filing was submitted within the procedural window, Patricia Holt said. "All documentation has been properly authenticated. The settlement agreement was signed by both parties with full legal representation present," Simone added. Judge Calloway replaced her glasses. "The continuance is denied. The settlement terms are legally binding as signed. The liability disclosures are entered into the record." She looked at her documents again. "Given the nature of the undisclosed liabilities now on record, I am also referring the matter of the Raymond Prout correspondence to the Financial Crimes Division for further review." She paused. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, not unkindly, in the way that truly devastating things are sometimes delivered, "you have accepted a significant amount of financial exposure in this settlement. I strongly advise you to consult extensively with your legal team before making any further decisions." Marcus said nothing. He was the color of paper. His hands, flat on the table in front of him, were very still, the stillness of a man whose internal experience is entirely consuming all available resources, leaving nothing for the exterior. Garrett was already on his phone. Eleanor, across the table, was looking at a point slightly above the judge's head. Her expression was composed. She was thinking in that moment about the science project Sophie had mentioned. Something about the water cycle. Something about evaporation, about how things that seem to disappear are never truly gone. They simply move into a different form, rising quietly and then returning transformed. The gavel came down. The settlement stood, every single word of it. Chapter 5. The purge. Raymond Prout was arrested on a Wednesday morning, 41 days after the settlement hearing. He was taken from his home, a modest house in a suburb 2 counties over, which he had been renting, as it happened, partly with the money he had extracted from Marcus Whitfield, by 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Division, accompanied by a federal agent whose involvement had been triggered by the interstate nature of certain transactions in the case. The charges included extortion, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The documentation supporting each charge was thorough, organized, and unimpeachable. It had been compiled, cross-referenced, and delivered to law enforcement by a private citizen, identified in the case record only as a cooperating witness 3 weeks before the settlement hearing. That private citizen was Eleanor Whitfield. She had made the decision quietly, and she had made it early. From the moment she identified Raymond Prout and understood the nature of his leverage over Marcus. She had understood that he represented a variable she could not allow to remain unresolved. A blackmailer whose demands were unsatisfied was a blackmailer who would keep demanding. Even after the settlement transferred Marcus's liabilities entirely to Marcus, Raymond Prout existed in the world as a man who knew things, a man whose continued freedom represented a continued threat to the clean, uncomplicated life Eleanor intended to build. She did not hate Raymond Prout in the same way she did not hate Marcus. She had no room in her framework for hate. Hate was expensive and imprecise, and Eleanor Whitfield had no interest in imprecision. She simply identified Raymond Prout as a problem with a solution, and she applied the solution with the same methodical calm she brought to everything else. The documentation she provided to law enforcement was comprehensive. It included the original transaction records from 5 years prior, materials she had obtained through legal discovery processes Patricia Holt had quietly initiated, as well as the correspondence between Raymond and Marcus, the payment records, and the $10 million demand letter. She provided it without drama, in a formal meeting with a financial crimes investigator named Detective Harlan, who had reviewed the materials with the focused silence of someone who has just been handed a complete jigsaw puzzle in a box. "This is very organized," he had said. "I find it helps," Eleanor had replied. The arrest of Raymond Prout closed the final open door. Marcus Whitfield, in the weeks following the settlement hearing, had engaged in the predictable responses of a man who has lost a battle he didn't know he was fighting. He retained new legal counsel, a larger firm, more expensive, with a reputation for aggressive negotiation. They filed a motion to revisit the settlement terms on the grounds that the liability disclosures constituted new material information. The motion was denied. The language on page 14 was airtight. Patricia Holt had spent 6 weeks making it so. He attempted, through informal channels, to contact Eleanor directly, a call she did not answer, followed by a text message she read once, noted in her log for the record, and did not reply to. He sold the Westfield Heights property 6 weeks after the settlement, in a hurried transaction that yielded, after mortgage balance and the now disclosed encumbrances, almost nothing. He was in active negotiations with the business's creditors. Whitfield Property Group, carrying $2.3 million in structural debt with its primary asset liquidated, was unlikely to survive the year. His attorneys were managing the Raymond Prout liability, the question of how a $10 million demand registered against a company that no longer had $10 million would be resolved was, Patricia Holt noted with a certain quiet satisfaction, entirely his problem now. Diana Calloway had, according to Grace Chen's final report, Eleanor had paid for one last update. For the sake of completeness, moved with her son to a city 3 states away within a month of the settlement hearing. Whether she had known the true state of Marcus's finances before committing to him, or had discovered it after, was not Eleanor's concern. She wished Diana Calloway nothing bad. She wished her, honestly, very little of anything. She simply noted her departure and closed that file. Eleanor moved into an apartment on the east side of the city in November. It was smaller than the house, intentionally so. 3 bedrooms, high ceilings, windows that looked out over a courtyard garden that was bare now in autumn, but which the building manager had assured her was spectacular in spring. She had furnished it slowly and with pleasure, choosing each piece herself, making no compromises, answering to no preferences but her own and Sophie's. Sophie had taken to the apartment with the pragmatic adaptability of a child who has been, without fully knowing it, raised by a very capable person. She had a bedroom with a window seat. She had made friends with the girl 2 floors up within a week. She had asked Eleanor once, in the careful way of a child who understands more than she says, whether things were going to be okay. Eleanor had sat down on the window seat beside her daughter and thought about the question honestly, the way she thought about all questions. "Yes," she had said. "Actually, I think they're going to be better than okay." Sophie had nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her book. Eleanor had sat there a moment longer, looking out at the courtyard, at the bare branches of the trees that would, in a few months, be full of leaves. She was thinking about the last 9 years. Not with bitterness, she had examined herself carefully for bitterness and found, to her genuine satisfaction, that there was very little of it. What she found instead, when she looked back at those years, was something more complex and less corrosive. She found a kind of retrospective clarity, the clear-eyed recognition of a woman who had spent nearly a decade being the most competent person in her own life, while allowing someone else to take credit for the architecture. That was finished now. She had spent 9 years managing Marcus Whitfield's world, his finances, his household, his emotional equilibrium, the smooth running of a life he seemed to believe maintained itself through some ambient form of magic. She had done it well. She had done it without recognition, without complaint, and without fully confronting until that first bank statement appeared, the cost of what she was doing. She did not regret the years. She had Sophie from those years. She had, in fact, an extraordinary education in the mechanics of financial systems, legal structures, and human behavior under pressure, and education that had cost her nothing but time and that had paid, in the end, in ways Marcus would be calculating the price of for years. What she was finished with was the role, the invisible role, the foundation that holds everything up while everyone admires the building. She was building something now. She and Patricia Holt had incorporated a small financial consulting practice 6 weeks before the settlement. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediately public, just the quiet planting of a seed. Her first 2 clients were women she had met through the evening real estate law course. Her third was a referral from Grace Chen, who had, it turned out, a professional network with considerable need for someone with Eleanor's particular combination of forensic patience and structural intelligence. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. The only thing that had changed was that now the work had her name on it. She picked up her phone. There was a message from Patricia, a dinner invitation, something celebratory she was overdue for. There was a message from Sophie, a photograph of a science project, the water cycle rendered in colored pencil, arrows showing the movement from ocean to cloud to rain to river and back again, everything connected, everything in motion, everything returning eventually to its source, transformed. Eleanor looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she typed back, "This is beautiful. Save it for me." She set down the phone. She looked at the courtyard, the bare branches, the pale November light, the absolute, uncomplicated quiet of a life that was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely her own. She was not at peace in the way of someone who has survived something. She was at peace in the way of someone who has finished something, who has set down a weight they were never supposed to be carrying and felt, in the surprising lightness that followed, the true shape of their own strength. She made tea. She sat in the quiet. She was Eleanor Whitfield, never raised her voice. She never made a dramatic phone call. She never sent an accusatory text at midnight. She never sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table and told him what she knew. She simply did what she had always done best. She observed. She documented. She planned. And she waited for the moment when all of that careful, invisible work would finally have her name on it. And here is what I want you to hold on to, because I think it matters more than the courtroom scene, more than the $10 million demand, more than watching Marcus go pale in front of a judge. Eleanor didn't do any of this out of revenge. She did it out of completion. She was finishing a chapter that had gone on too long, correcting an equation that had been unbalanced for years, and making sure that when she walked out of that equation, she carried exactly what she was owed, not a dollar more, not a dollar less. That is a very different thing from revenge. Revenge is loud and hot and leaves marks. What Eleanor did was quiet and precise, and it left her clean. There are people in your life right now who have been underestimating you, who have looked right at the foundation you built and seen only the walls they put up in front of it, who have taken your competence for granted so long that they have confused your patience for powerlessness. Eleanor's story is for them, too, as a reminder of what patience is actually building toward. If this story hit different today, share it. Someone in your circle needs this one right now. You know who they are. Send it to them. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are here every week with stories like this. Stories about the people who play the long game and win it completely. Like the video if you believe that the quietest people in the room are sometimes keeping the most extraordinary score. Eleanor's apartment overlooks a courtyard garden. In spring, she says, it's spectacular. She's not wrong. She's never wrong. Next.